Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well, and welcome to our lesson 2 review in World Geography. My name is Paul. I'm one of the instructors here at Penn Foster High School. I know I recognize a number of the names in attendance today, so it's wonderful to see you all again. Once again, my email is up there. If you ever have questions about world geography or civics or American history as you go along in your coursework, please feel free to give me send me an email. Otherwise, my community site is also available. That I'm more than happy to help you out there as well. So there are a number of ways to get in touch with me when you have questions or when you have any concerns about any of your courses. Goodness. All right. Typically, as we get started, I like to kind of review why world geography is so important, why this course is so important as we get started, and as hopefully all of you are working towards world geography or in world geography. It's always nice to know, there's a purpose, not just to get good grades, not just to earn the credit in the course, but also to really know, this has a purpose. This has a purpose in my life. It helps me understand that there are people out there, there are situations, there are people's lives are really affected by their geography and by the human geography that we look at and we talk about in this course. And because we kind of gain that understanding, we are also able to create sort of that idea of multiculturalism, that all cultures work together, all cultures have that focus of establishing lives and making our lives and their lives better. And that's the other real big purpose of learning about world geography and understanding the world that we live in. Specifically, today I want to go over how to understand or how to prepare for this world geography exam, how some of those strategies will help you improve your scores in not just world geography but also other courses. And lesson 2 specifically will go over some of the concepts and go over some of the vocabulary that you find in lesson 2, which are chapters 4 and 5 in your textbooks. If you do want to have the textbook out as a reference, feel free to have it. And hopefully, again, this will give us a good indication as to what it is that will help you be successful in the course. Are there any questions or anything that you guys have before we get going? Doesn't look like anything is coming up yet. All right. So let's start talking about overall strategies for preparing for this exam and for other exams. If you were in my webinar this 2 weeks ago about lesson 1, these strategies are pretty much the same, but it's important to really go over them because they are important, and it'll help us be prepared for future exams, not only in world geography, but in other courses that specifically have textbooks in Penn Foster High School. So the first one is one that I find important to really make sure that you are understanding the material well, and that is first reading the digital study guide, reading over the lesson material in the study guide, and then follow that up with the textbook. The study guide gives you a lot of good main ideas, a lot of good concepts to be looking for, and then the textbook gets more into the specifics, gets into the details that are going to be in the exam. When looking in your looking at your questions for your exams, and even looking in the self-checks in the study guide, the table of contents in the front of the book and the index in the back of the book is really key towards finding the section that you're going to be wanting to, that you'll be able to find the answers. It'll give you a good set of pages to look in. Just as I mentioned before, the self-checks in the study guides, those can be really a good way of making sure that you are understanding the material. The self-checks can guide you towards knowing, okay, these are concepts I understand from that unit or from that lesson. These are concepts that I don't understand. And when you do find you have questions, again, that's what I'm here for. If you send me a message on the community, send me an email, phone calls, any of those ways, I can certainly help you with concepts that you're not sure about or confused by. The last part is being able to preview the exam. When you are when you're ready to take the test, you've read the study guide, read the textbook, completed those self-checks, then you can go to that preview exam and be able to see the 20 multiple choice questions that you're going to be asked to answer as your grade. And that's how all these strategies kind of work together, particularly using this table of contents and using the index to be able to search for some of those keywords within the questions. Okay. Were there any questions, any comments that you guys had, anything that you wanted me to go over, or really if you've used these concepts or used these strategies from the last webinar, were there any ones that helped you significantly or were better than others? Anyone have any comments about that? Okay. Looks like everyone is doing okay so far. And as we go through the rest of the webinar, if you do have questions about any of these strategies, by all means, use the question or the chat bar in the webinar to be able to let me know what concerns you guys are having. All right. So what I want to do next is go through some of the major concepts within chapters 4 and 5 in the textbook, which takes care of the lesson. Lesson 2, like I said, goes over both chapters 4 and 5 within the textbook. And a lot of those concepts, a lot of the concepts that I'll be going over are ones that will be addressed in the questions on your exam. Not all of them, obviously, because we do have randomized exams. So you'll see some of these concepts in your exams, and a lot of them you may not. But they are certainly ones that are going to be important. The first part of Chapter 4 goes over population, and specifically within human geography, population density. And as you can see from this themed map, the population density really varies greatly throughout the region. Japan has the greatest density because it is all thin islands, as you can see. The cities in the lowlands hold about 70% of the population. The cities in the southern section of Japan are so close together that they actually flow from one right into the next one. And this is called, from the textbook, a megalopolis. The western areas of the Korean Peninsula and the island of Taiwan are almost just as equally dense, as you can see on the theme map. China has the greatest variety of population because much of the country has low density because it is farmland and a lot of rural towns. However, it is the cities of the east that have the highest density. Now, specifically looking at China, the population density really was affected during or since the time of the Communist Revolution right after World War II. it developed different population policies depending on the time period and what the leadership of China was really looking for. In the 1970s, the leadership ended years of up and down policies of we want higher populations, we want lower populations, and established the what's called the Great Leap Forward. The basic idea was to have for the Chinese to be encouraged to have as many children as possible. You can see that on this graph that starting even before the 1970s into the 1960s, this great leap forward policy was instituted, and the number of children that Chinese were having, those large families, really made the population skyrocket during the next decades. This policy led also to having food shortages as well as other resources being in short supply because there were not enough to take care of the people. The Chinese government worked on policies for the next decades, attempting to control the overpopulation that was plaguing their cities. The study referenced here by Sun Yan was done by a nuclear scientist in 1979. He was asked by the government to use the same formulas that he used for missile trajectory to calculate what would happen to the nation's population if Chinese families were allowed to only have 1, 2, or 3 children. The decision finally came that the government would institute a one-child policy. You can see how that changed in around well after the 2000s, that this policy actually did change and has created a much straighter line, a much less straight up angle of the population. That they're really predicting the population to become very stable and not move up too much after starting with around 2020 into 2030s, that the population will stabilize pretty much. The next section is about Chinese history, and it's really a rich history. And the book goes into some detail of it. I would really encourage you, if you are interested in Chinese history, there's a lot of information out there about China, about its history, and perhaps on the community, I might try posting a few different sites that go more into detail about the Chinese history. Because it is such a long history. China's been around really since the early centuries of human writing and of the human expansion. So during the early dynasties, or dynasties are the ruling family or sort of the kingdom, 2 philosophies of government were established that are really actually still used and still referenced today. Confucius, the first one, was an administrator in the Zhou dynasty and believed in order and good management within a society. The alternative philosophy was Taoism, and that was sort of the it's well known for the opposing sides of humanity being yin and yang. However, the philosopher also believed the yin and the yang were about government control as well, between local and national government control. The successful Qin dynasty, along with that of Kublai Khan's Mongolian leaders, developed strong central governments under Confucian thought. After the Chinese won their independence from the Mongols, the Ming dynasty advanced culture of the time, as well as advanced imperial ambition. Sorry about that. So that's Confucius. I'm sorry. I forgot about these pictures. And this next one is showing the invasions of the Mongolians and their new empire. And then this map with of the Ming Dynasty from 1368 all the way through 1644 is a show of just how much the empire expanded during this period. And a lot of it had to do with this new navy that was created to create a greater expansion of Imperial Japan, mostly into India, and then even more so into the Middle East. Now, we're going to kind of jump forward a couple of centuries up to the Communist Revolution, which I mentioned a little while ago. After the World War II, the Chinese government worked towards developing industries to make it a stronger economy. Once that was successfully developed in the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution centralized government power away from the local communities by sending in the military to enforce government policy. The government further changed course in the 1980s to increase agriculture. In the household responsibility system, commune systems were created for families to have a lease for land to grow crops and to meet quotas by the government of how much crops they should grow, and then any surplus crops, any extra crops that they had, they would be able to sell in local markets and be able to make extra money. So this is an example from the Cultural Revolution, this picture of how the government tried controlling its people using the military and using force to limit the power of local governments, and allowing the central government, the national government of Beijing, to have ultimate control and have ultimate authority within the country. Any questions so far? That one was. This is sort of the bulk of the presentation, kind of going over the vast history of the Chinese people. All right. So the next section, looking at the Chinese economy, we kind of touched on this with the Chinese history, but along with the spread of local control. Along with the local control, the government really looked at trying to create markets and try to create urban growth within China. And that's part of why so much population density is among the cities, because the government really wanted to make Beijing and other cities on the East Coast the economic centers and the market centers for not only Asia but also the world. And the book does reference what's called the East Asian Miracle, and in 1993 it referenced how much economic growth there was in China, and how much industries had been developed within China. And then in 2001, the World Bank sort of did a revision of this East Asian Miracle, and looking at the environmental impacts, and were a little less happy with Chinese development, and were worried about the further expansion. I don't know, for those of you who remember the Summer Olympics in Beijing, one of the issues coming up to the games was the amount of smog, and that is directly influenced by this urban growth, this movement towards industries, and the industrial sectors of China became the air became so polluted over the years that China really had to control the amount of pollution to be able to make it safe for visitors, make it safe for the athletes that were coming. Okay, there we go. So in general, there are a couple of different ethnic groups within China and within all of this East Asia. In China, what's called the Han Chinese, which are the ancestors of, or the descendants, I'm sorry, of what we call as one of the main dynasties in China, which was the Han Dynasty, and they were the controlling group within the country. Now they are have less control, but they are still the vast majority of the population within the country. The country of Japan, which has its own history, much less known than the Chinese one, primarily because it was one that it didn't have its own independent country for a lot of its history. And it was controlled by China, it was controlled by Russia, it was controlled by different European countries. So their ethnicity, their nationality, much more of a mix because of the way in the Japanese history being far less unifying. That it wasn't a one country that expanded over the years. It's been a mix for many centuries, and it continues to be that way with the mix of Asian mainland ethnicities as well as Pacific Islanders that continue to mix throughout history. The North and South Koreans, we hear a lot about both sides of the country, and they seem to be very different, but that's really been only the last 60 years, that since the division of the country after the Korean War in 1953. Before then, it was a very unified country, and the ethnicity was the same. They shared their history along the peninsula. But again, 60 years ago, with the line between the two halves of North and South Korea, they have become far more divided, even with their shared history and shared ethnicity. The next section we have is for geography. And we have our first section revolving around Japan. All right. And for Japan, the country itself is 4 major islands, and its capital being Tokyo. And it's actually Japanese for the Eastern Capital. It was formerly, it had been the main palace of the shogun, which was the ninja king when the ninjas were in control of the country a few centuries ago. And at that time it was called Edo, but in 1867 the emperor decided to move Tokyo, or move the capital to Tokyo, and it continues to be that today. Here's a picture of modern Tokyo, a very industrial city, a very large city. That population density very high, and as I said at the beginning of the presentation, because Japan has such a small physical geography, does not have a lot of area to it, the people who live there, the people who live in and work in Tokyo, really are in that area. And the southern half of Japan, with those megalopolises, those mega cities, there's a large population centered in that region of the country. The Korean Peninsula, as we mentioned, divided along that 38th parallel after what's called the armistice. There's no real treaty for the Korean War. It was just a end of conflict, end of the war, because both sides just wanted to be done, wanted to end the conflict And now we have what's called that DMZ, the demilitarized zone, where between both North and South Korea, there's just a small section of land that neither one controls, and constantly both sides have soldiers on their side of the border and are just watching the other side. And we are constantly in that section of, hopefully nothing else happens along that DMZ, along that demilitarized zone, with both sides just kind of watching each other. Along the kind of connecting with that geography is the kind of the constant struggle for human rights. And in certain sections of human rights, some countries are doing very well, other countries are doing very poorly. In gender equality, the Chinese are doing actually very well. The founder of Communist China, Mao Zedong, believed that that men and women were very equal, that they could, they are part of the same universe, they're part of the same world. Japan and South Korea, far more traditional, far more believing that men are superior to women. There has been much like in much of the world, there's been less of that and less of discrimination towards women, but it's certainly still part of the culture of women being less than men. Ethnic equality is equally a concern. In China, it's much worse for the Han Chinese, that they are still having problems with equality and problems with having equality, as well as in Japan, that again, that traditional stance, there is a lot of people who still are believe certain groups are better than others, and in a country that has a lot of mix, there's still a question of, are certain groups better than others? Are the Pacific Islanders or the mainland Asians a better group because of their race? That continues to be a problem within both China and Japan. Any questions on Chapter 4 material? Looks like people are still doing okay. Norma, I certainly hope that you'll receive your book soon as well. Hopefully you do have material that's available for you, and that'll continue to be able to continue on with your program and your studies. All right. So Chapter 5 goes into Southeast Asia, and the main geography question within Southeast Asia is the division within the Indian Ocean. And you'll see on this picture of Indonesia what's called this Wallace Line. And the Wallace Line was created by an explorer who wanted to look at the division of Indonesia and the islands around Indonesia between the climates. And the climate zones within that country are not significant, but they are certainly there. That there are the warmer climate versus the more humid, versus the rainy seasons, versus the heat, is certainly something that the people on either side of the Wallace Line are taking care of and are looking at each and every day. Okay. So in terms of human geography, there is a rich history of not necessarily kingdoms and not necessarily civilizations growing, but a lot of migration and a lot of movement throughout what we consider to be that Southeast Asia. Countries like in Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, those countries have a lot of movement, and it focuses what is now in Cambodia, this Khmer Empire. And you see a picture on the bottom there of what was a Khmer temple in Cambodia, and how it became a growing civilization way back in the 800s up through the 1200s in Cambodia. Now, in much of Asian and even African history, we see that some of these great civilizations are conquered by European powers. And this is the same way in Southeast Asia, in which countries throughout Europe decide to colonize these areas, including the United Kingdom, the Portuguese, who conquer parts of Thailand, parts of Indonesia, as well as the French taking over Vietnam, famously, as well as Laos and Cambodia, and parts of Cambodia as well. Each of those European countries sort of carve up and divide up Southeast Asia, much like they did in North America as well as in China over the same period. After the colonization and the revolutions, I'm sure we've heard about the Vietnam War, and after America left Vietnam in 1975, there continued to be human rights issues within both Vietnam and in Cambodia. The group that became the rulers in Cambodia became known as the Khmer Rouge, based on taking their name from the Khmer Empire of 800s to the 1200s. And both leadership in Cambodia and Vietnam, both communist countries, really take advantage of their leadership roles and attack and kill many of the supporters of the former leaders of American leaders. Those who support America, I should say, went after and imprisoned a lot of the supporters of the former leadership. That has since been reduced. We now see both countries modernizing, both countries doing more to improve human rights and also improve urbanization and improve industrialization, as well as being able to improve themselves economically. As I mentioned on that slide, Thailand is famous for being really the only nation in Southeast Asia that was not colonized during this time. They were able to stop both British and Portuguese expansion, and have been able to remain free throughout those centuries, throughout the time that other countries were being colonized. In Vietnam specifically, the Vietnamese economy has been developing slowly. They continue to have trouble. They continue to have problems. There is a great graph on page 143 in your textbooks that looks at what's called the GNI, the gross national product that each country and each area of Southeast Asia develops. And different countries are, Singapore particularly, doing very well. Vietnam way on the other extreme, doing poorly, not being able to make not having its people make enough money, not having enough exports, though they are improving. The rice and coffee exports are now competing with larger markets in order to have, particularly Brazil, I'm sorry, in the coffee exports, as one of the highest exports of coffee and of other cash crops. They are improving their condition in terms of the amount of exports and the amount of crops that they're sending out. The next country in East Timor is a country that is our newest country, the newest country in the region. It divided between East Timor and main Timor as a country. Both sides had been under Portuguese imperialism and Portuguese control. And it is famously one of the countries that has remained very popular in Roman Catholicism. That many of the majority of its people have continued to be Catholic and continue to have being able to continue to be a country of support and a country that is continuing to develop after imperialism and after it's gained its freedom and its independence. All right. Finally, in our Southeast Asia, the quest for many of these countries to gain more and more as economic powers and as economic groups. We've talked about the trading that many of these countries now have and the amount of exports that they are trying to develop, trying to create greater wealth within their country. And one of those ways that they've really been able to do over the last several decades is creating groups that can support each other in terms of creating greater and greater power economically in their region. The first one, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was first created, and its founding member was Thailand in 1991. And it's been creating free trade between those countries and creating economic and cultural development between each other and being able to help each other and develop trade with each other. The other group, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, much the same way, except they are also developing ties with countries outside of Southeast Asia, including Canada, Australia, United States, South Korea. They have expanded their role in the international community and trying to, again, create greater and greater economic power within themselves. Within the South China Sea, it's been a conflict of who has power to control that sea, and particularly being able to have the authority to be able to use the sea as they would like. Countries like China, Vietnam, Cambodia, they are all trying to use that waterway because, particularly for delivering oil, for delivering goods, continues to be a conflict and continues to be trading questions between those countries. And finally, the country of Singapore has developed well, but continues to struggle as a country, continues to be looked to the international community to be able to gain authority and gain greater and greater economic independence as a country. And with organizations like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, Singapore, along with many of the other countries, are developing economically by leaps and bounds over the last decades and continues to do so. Are there any questions? I know there was a lot of information. I will be posting this on, or you'll be getting a recording of this probably in the next few hours. I will be getting this onto the community in the next few hours as well. And if you certainly have questions, if you have comments, you do have my email. You have my, hopefully you all have friended me on the community. If you haven't, I will be there. But thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you guys again. I know you guys have gotten messages about the next social studies webinars are going to be about American history by Brian Brown. He will be talking a lot about some of the strategies that are going to be useful for American history, and hopefully will be helpful for not only those in American history, but also those in other courses as well, including world geography. So I certainly encourage you, if you haven't registered for those webinars, to do so. I know he will be doing an excellent presentation and will be giving you guys a lot of good information. But thank you so much. I do appreciate you all coming, and good luck with your program, and take care.